Good morning, everybody. Today, I would like to give you an overview of this knowledge area in adversarial behaviors that I've been writing as part of a cybersecurity body of knowledge. So what are we trying to summarize in this knowledge area? Basically, the internet has created multiple opportunities for adversaries to cause harm in a number of capacities, from cyber criminals trying to make money from victims to state actors who are actually trying to gain other types of advantages by using electronic means and so on. In this knowledge area, we provide an overview of the malicious activities happening on the internet today. And in particular, we are focusing on the elements needed by adversaries to succeed in their operations. And I should say that we actually focus on academic literature, so we study what has been covered in academic literature, so with rigor and hard data and so on and so forth, just to provide an overview of what's going on and drawing a roadmap of what might be the threats that will actually be happening in the future. And also, we discussed a number of frameworks that have been proposed to model these malicious operations. So I will start by giving you an overview of what a malicious operation looks like, a complex, multi-country malicious operation, which is basically the focus of what we're talking about in this knowledge area. So suppose we have a user located in the United Kingdom, and this user wants to visit a website, let's say the weather website that she visits every day to check what the weather is like today. To do that, she will basically direct her browser to the weather website, and her browser will contact a website, a web server, which in this case is located on the west coast of the United States. So in a normal scenario, what will happen is that the user will see the weather for the day and decide whether she should carry an umbrella or something like that. However, something might go wrong. So what could happen is that a criminal got access to this website, to this web server, and actually exploited a vulnerability in this web server. And as such, basically, the criminal added some content there that shouldn't be there. And what this content will do is actually telling the victim's browser to, yes, download the weather for the day as normal, but also go to another website, malicious.com, behind the scenes. And so without even realizing, the user gets redirected to this malicious website, which in this example is located in China. And this second website will actually try to perform what is called a drive-by download on the victim, which essentially tries to exploit a software vulnerability in the victim's computer. And if this is successful, will actually direct the victim's computer to download malware and automatically install it. So after this happens, now the victim's computer is infected, and it becomes part of what we call a botnet, which is a network of compromised computers that are controlled by the same criminal. So the victim might go on, and keep doing whatever she wanted to do, but behind the scenes, her computer is actually contacting additional malicious computers. So it might actually contact an infected computer, which is used by the criminal as a proxy, just to hide the traces of where the criminal is actually located. In this case, it's located in Brazil. And this computer will actually just redirect the connection to the actual controller of this botnet, which is in this example located in Russia. So this is where the criminal is sitting and where the criminal can actually give orders to the infected computer to perform malicious activities. And in this case, this botnet is actually not performing any malicious activities per se, but what actually the criminal is doing is renting this botnet to other criminals who might want to carry out malicious operations. And so in this example, we have another criminal who's located in India, who will actually pay money to the first actor to get access to the victim's computer. And together with money, they will also provide a malicious program that they want installed on the victim's computer. And now after this is done, the second criminal can actually control whatever the victim's computer is doing and make some money out of it. So in this example, the victim's computer will be instructed to connect to another control infrastructure that's controlled by the second criminal. And what this control infrastructure will do is basically ordering the victim's computer to generate encryption keys and encrypting all their files with these keys, and then sending the key over to the criminal. And then after this, basically all their files will be encrypted, and the criminal will get this infamous ransom note saying, all your files are encrypted. You need to pay some bitcoins to get them back, to get your key back, and get all your documents and all your files back. So at this point, the victim will either restore a backup if she was lucky enough to have a backup and be able to get her files back, or will decide to pay the criminal with bitcoins, at which point the criminal will release the encryption key and the victim will get her files back. Now, as you can see, this is a rather simple malicious operation. So the victim gets infected with malware and her files get encrypted and they get released only after she pays a ransom. But as you have seen, there are many actors involved, many different technical elements involved, and so on and so forth. And these technical elements are all needed for the operation to be somewhat successful. So in this knowledge area, I will basically cover both adversaries and their operations. So what kind of malicious harms are malicious operators trying to carry out on the internet, as well as the elements that are needed to carry out these operations. And I will provide a very brief overview of what's covered in the document, and please feel free to check the document, which has many, many references that actually go into great detail about every single one of these elements. So let's first start with the characterization of adversaries. And in the knowledge area, we actually provide a characterization based on the motivation of offenders. And this characterization is driven by case studies. And as I said, these are have been analyzed by researchers over the past year. So it's mostly covering academic research. And this is the reason why, in certain areas, you might actually lag a little bit behind, what we're currently seeing, but that is because, to collect data and, check theories and so on and provide academic rigor, we need some time to actually catch up. Broadly speaking, when we talk about crimes in particular and cybercrime, many of these adversarial behaviors are driven by criminal intent, not all of them. But when we talk about criminal operations, there are two types of cybercrimes that have been identified by research. The first one is what we call cyber-enabled crime. And essentially, these are crimes that existed before the internet, but that they were greatly facilitated by the internet, both in reach and in scale. Meaning that the internet, when you think about, for example, fraud, allows criminals to reach many more victims and reach these many victims in a much easier way. So essentially, the operation of reaching out to victims, you can think of it as free. You can send emails to potentially millions of people without having to pay. Before the internet, when criminals had to send physical letters or faxes or whatever, that was actually came with a cost, and so this restricted the scale of their operation. And then we have what we call cyber-dependent crimes, which essentially are crimes that are only possible through the use of computers. And these includes, for example, the ransomware example that I included before. Extortion is a crime that used to exist and still exists in the physical world, but encrypting files and asking for a ransom at a large scale is something that is only possible through the internet. Same goes with denial of service attacks, in which actually criminals use computing resources to take down online content, potentially asking for a ransom or extort money, and so on and so forth. So keeping in mind this difference between cyber-enabled crimes and cyber-dependent crimes, I will focus on different types of offenders and the type of crimes that are actually perpetrating on the internet. And the first one are interpersonal offenders. So these are crimes that happen from person to person, so they're reasonably small-scale crimes, and typically they have one perpetrator and one victim. And they used to happen in the physical world a lot. So if you think about cyberbullying, the act of bullying used to happen in, or still happens in the real world a lot, but the internet somewhat facilitated it. And cyberbullying is the practice of sending or posting harmful material or engaging in other forms of social aggression using social media, the internet, or other digital technologies. And in the knowledge area, I provide some references on, how this crime unfolds and what has been studied and so on. Another type of interpersonal offense is doxing, in which actually the attacker gains some private information from the victim and releases it publicly online, typically to call for further attacks. Think about, for example, activists being attacked. Their opponents might actually release either their home address or their social media handles and so on, asking for further attacks that can even be either be online or they can happen actually in person. Another type of offense that falls under this area is cyber stalking, which is actually the practice of using electronic means to stalk another person. So, used to have stalking in the real world, in which perpetrator used to follow people around and so on. This is possible online as well. And then we have other types of crimes, such as, for example, sextortion, which is an emerging crime in which victims are lured to perform sexual acts, for example, in front of a camera, and then the perpetrator will record these acts and then threaten to release these acts unless some sort of ransom is paid. And then, of course, we have child predation and grooming, which is a big problem in the real world, but actually the internet, to some extent, helps criminals find their victims through chat rooms, social media, and so on and so forth. So this is the first category of crimes that we discuss in the knowledge area, and then we move on to more organized crime, keeping in mind the difference between cyber-enabled and cyber-dependent crimes that I highlighted before. So if we keep in mind that cyber-enabled crimes are crimes that used to happen in the real world before the internet, but they are somewhat helped by the internet to reach more victims and being easier to perform. We have two main examples of this kind of cyber-enabled crimes that are carried out by organized criminals. So these are organizations carrying them out. The first one being advanced fee fraud, which is the kind of crime in which the victim is contacted and a very financially rewarding situation is promised. But in order to obtain the reward, the victim has to pay some money upfront. And then after the payment takes place, the victim often does not hear back from the scammer ever again. And in the knowledge area, we cover different types, different flavors of this fraud. Some of them are the traditional 419 scam, in which the criminal contacts the victim saying, I'm a very rich person, for example, I need to transfer money out of the country. I'm being prosecuted by my government. Please help me moving this money out. To do that, you first need to put some money in a bank account to show that you're meaning well and you're serious and so on. To the other side of the spectrum, in which actually the scammer spends a lot of time grooming the victim, and these are scams that, for example, happen on online dating sites. So the scammer will actually try to establish a long-distance relationship with the victim, gain their trust, and eventually ask for some money building up some sort of narrative. For example, I need money to come visit you, or my family has some problems and I need to do something else. I need to take care of it, and so on. These kind of scams can cause big financial damage to their victims. So research showed that the losses can amount to up to £240,000, for example. And then another type of cyber-enabled organized crime is drug dealing. So, we are used to thinking of drug dealing as having drug dealers at the corners of the street, and somewhat drug users need to go and interact with them, which can be dangerous at times, and so on. The internet actually allows people to buy drugs online, and there are marketplaces that emerged, and they've been facilitated through anonymizing technologies such as Tor and cryptocurrencies, and so on and so forth. And there is a lot of research in this area, which I sketched in the knowledge area, both on what these markets look like, as well as what kind of countermeasures can be taken to take them down, and what has law enforcement tried to actually take down these operations. Moving on, we get to cyber-dependent organized criminals. So these are still organized crimes, but they look at crimes that are actually carried out over the internet, and they need to be carried out over the internet. They could not exist otherwise. And examples of these are traditionally email spam. So sure, junk mail always used to happen, but actually sending emails allowed criminals to reach an unprecedented level of reach, as well as performing completely different types of crimes that lead to phishing, stealing of credentials, up to selling counterfeit goods, pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. And in the literature, we've seen that there are criminal operations that allow miscreants to send billions of potential emails and making a reasonable amount of money in return. And then the other type of crime is financial malware. So frauds have always happened, but actually computers allow criminals to perform frauds that were not possible before. An example being stealing credit card numbers and then using them to purchase goods online at scale, as well as stealing online banking usernames and passwords, and so on. So in the knowledge area, we actually go into great detail about what these crimes entail, as well as what do the technical infrastructures used by criminals look like. So we have a number of case studies, for example, the Torpid botnet that was studied by researchers back in 2009, and that essentially gave an unprecedented view of what these operations actually looked like, and so on. Taking aside organized criminals, we then get to other types of crimes, such as what we call hacktivism, which is the act of computer crime motivated by political goals. So while before organized criminals are motivated by money, hacktivists are motivated by a message. So they want to spread a message, they want to attack political opponents, and so on and so forth. And to do that, they perform a number of harmful activities, going from denial of service, which is basically the use of technology, which can be compromised computers, can be willing participants to the attack, and so on, to exhaust the network bandwidth of a target, an adversary, which can be a website, for example. And the effect is that the adversary now is not accessible anymore, and potentially they lose money. Think, for example, about an operation to take down Amazon. If the Amazon website went down, well, they would lose a lot of money because people could not make purchases during that period of time, as well as they would suffer a reputational damage. Then we have data leaks, where actually criminals break into an organization and then they release stolen documents into the public domain to both raise awareness and potentially harm their opponent. And an example here are, for example, Snowden revelations and so on, in which actually awareness was raised about secret surveillance programs by governments and so on and so forth. And the third category of hacktivist activity are web defacements, in which actually criminals will exploit vulnerabilities in websites, get access to them, and then use these vulnerabilities to change the content of both websites. For example, by including a message saying, this website was hacked by organization X, and this is our message, and this is what we are doing, and why we want recognition, and so on and so forth. Beyond hacktivists, another type of crime that is actually not financially motivated are state actors. So state actors are actually nation states who are somewhat involved in cyber operations to further their goals. And the interesting difference between state actors and the other types of malicious activities that I described before is that they typically have unlimited resources, so to speak. And their targets are so targeted that they can actually spend as much time as needed to actually break into them. And so their techniques are much more sophisticated because they don't need to scale up. So if we think about traditional cyber-dependent crime, these criminals are motivated by money and they want to infect as many people as possible in the shortest period of time to make as much money as possible. And so for this reason, the techniques they use need to be somewhat general purpose. In the case of state actors, they can actually tailor the attack to a single entity. Let's say they want to break into a specific organization, they want to break into a specific government. They can spend the time to do that and then carry out their activity. And typically we see two types of malicious activity here. One being sabotage, in which actually the attack is launched to damage an organization or, for example, the critical infrastructure of a country and so on. The typical example of this being Stuxnet. And then we have espionage, in which actually the attack and the malware is used to infiltrate organization and then later on steal sensitive data. And this sensitive data can then be leaked, if this is the goal, or can be used, for example, for industrial espionage or traditional, state actor espionage types of activities. So these are the types of adversarial behaviors that we study in our knowledge area. And of course, there is much more detail in the document. And then we move on to looking at the elements that are actually needed to carry out these malicious operations. So we talked about malware, we talked about internet technology, we talked about denial of service, we talked about anonymizing technologies like Tor and cryptocurrencies and whatnot. These are all common elements that can be used by criminals and other types of adversaries in some capacity. So the main idea here is that any adversary will need their operation to be efficient and to be resilient. So criminals, for example, want to have an operation that costs them the least possible amount of money and gives them the highest possible reward. And they also want an operation that's not easy for law enforcement to take down. And in the knowledge area, we go through a historical perspective of what's been happening in the cybercrime world over time. And so 15, 20 years ago, criminals actually performed a one-man operation. And they carried out every single step of the malicious operation. They took care of infecting people with malware. They took care of collecting email addresses to send spam to. They took care of sending whichever goods were ordered through spam, and so on and so forth. Later on, though, as the scale increased and also as defenses improved, this was not profitable anymore. And so we've witnessed a shift in the cybercrime world in which basically criminals became much more specialized, and there was a compartmentalization of criminal tasks, and these underground markets emerged in which criminals can actually trade services with each other. So what we've seen is that a single criminal might be specialized in a specific element of this operation, let's say infecting computers with malware. If you remember the example I gave you at the beginning of this presentation, there was a criminal who infected the victim's computer through a drive-by download, and that's it. The only thing this person did was then renting that infection to someone else who actually knew how to monetize it. And these different criminals actually trade their services on black markets and underground forums and so on. And in the knowledge area, I provide references to studies that actually looked at how this market operates and what these different actors look like and so on. But let's now look at what are these services that criminals actually need to have in place. The first one, which is maybe one of the most important ones, are affiliate programs. So we have affiliate programs in legitimate services where typically someone is carrying out the entire backend of the operation. So let's say Amazon has an affiliate program. I can sign up and start advertising on my blog about products advertised on Amazon. People clicking on the links on my blog will go to Amazon, will buy their services, will buy their goods, and Amazon will take care of the orders, the payments, the shipping, and all of that. All that I get back is basically a commission, because the person who was interested in buying a computer, for example, found that link through my blog. In the criminal world, there are similar affiliate programs. And the typical example is email spam. So there are companies that are advertising illicit goods. This can be counterfeit pharmaceuticals, or can be counterfeit designer objects like watches or clothes and so on. And these people take care of setting up websites, setting up payment infrastructure, setting up shipping facilities, and so on and so forth. And all these operations require a lot of domain knowledge, because the criminals need to know which banks, for example, are willing to do business with them, which shipping agents are less likely to be tracked, and so on and so forth. So now a criminal who wants to get into this business doesn't need to worry about that. There is already an affiliate program that they can sign up to, and all they need to do is basically sending traffic, sending victims to the affiliate program. And this typically happens through email spam. So a criminal can just send spam advertising the affiliate program. The victims will go to the affiliate program website, buy something. Eventually, the criminal will get money because they sent traffic to the affiliate program. Now, this is an important part of the malicious operation, but it's not the only one. So if you think about email spam, someone needs to send the spam. And the most effective way to do that is through infected computers. And so a criminal will also need to infect computers with malware to send the emails that the affiliate program provided them. And so to do that, there are other actors who are actually specialized in infecting computers with malware. And this can be done through in a number of ways, through malicious attachments, through black hat search engine optimization. So this is the case in which a criminal is actually injecting malicious content in search results. So suppose that I go to Google and search for the latest Premier League results. A criminal might have been able to illicitly make a page show up in Google results by basically gaming the way in which a search engine actually ranks results and so on. And we have more details about this in the knowledge area. And then there are drive-by download attacks in which actually criminals are exploiting vulnerabilities in the victim's computer to automatically infect them with malware. And this was sort of a big change in the way in which malware was operated, because if you think about malicious attachments and so on and so forth, the victim needs to be lured into installing the malware. So there is a social engineering component, and this deception, while effective, it actually only works on a fraction of the victims, right? While if the infection is actually performed automatically, basically any vulnerable computer will be infected regardless of whether the victim would fall for the scam or not. And then we need infrastructure. So all this malicious content needs to be hosted somewhere. So the malware needs controllers, command and control servers, which needs to be hosted in a place that's somewhat safe, is not easy to be taken down, and is also difficult to blacklist, because if security companies, for example, realize that there is a single IP address that's hosting malicious content, it would be easy to blacklist and block it. So these malicious contents are actually moving around using techniques like fast flags and whatnot, which we discuss in detail in the knowledge area. And here we also have hosting providers who are willingly doing business with criminals. These are called bulletproof hosting service providers. And for example, host command and control servers, but also illicit websites like the affiliate programs one. And these are providers that either reside in countries which have no well-defined cybercrime legislation, or they simply bribe local law enforcement to sort of, turn a blind eye and not act upon complaints and so on and so forth. And we have more references about this in our document. If we look more about other types of services required by criminals, we see that over the last few years, there were some specialized services that emerged. And these are sort of very well-oiled operations that provide a very reliable service to criminals. So we talked about drive-by download attacks. Drive-by download attacks have been further weaponized by what are called exploit kits, which are essentially tools, pieces of software that collect a number of exploits for different vulnerabilities and package them in a way that criminals can use them. So while a criminal could go and purchase different exploits on the internet and then manage them themselves, it is much easier to just purchase access to an exploit kit, which is basically a website that contains virtually all exploits that are out there, and is very proficient in actually fingerprinting the victim's computer and figuring out which vulnerabilities they have and providing the correct exploit and compromising them. And another orthogonal way of infecting computers with malware are paper install services, in which actually the paper install operator is very good at infecting computers with malware through the use of exploit kits or other ways. And what they offer is just access to these infected computers. So another criminal can go and say, I want to buy 1,000 computers in the United States for a month or something like that. And the paper install service will actually oblige. And this was part of the example that I provided at the beginning of this presentation. Then we have many interesting elements that are required for an end-to-end criminal operation to succeed, but we typically don't think about as part of cybercrime. But without them, the operation will not be successful. And we go through great detail in describing them in the knowledge area, but I will just give you an overview of them now. For example, criminals often need to create fake accounts on online services. So think about a scam operation happening on Facebook, they will need to create Facebook accounts. If they want to perform online dating fraud, they will need to create online dating accounts and so on. So to create these accounts, typically criminals need to solve CAPTCHAs, which are countermeasures that are there to prevent automated programs from creating accounts. And this is doable if they need to create a small number of accounts, but if they need to create many of them, this can get out of hand very easily. And so there are services that actually offer to solve these CAPTCHAs for a small amount of money. And these can be, for example, services located in developing countries where labor is cheaper, and therefore this is still affordable for criminals, or they can be services that use malware to do that. So suppose that your computer is infected. Every once in a while you're browsing a website, you will be displayed a CAPTCHA, and you will solve it, because this is somewhat something that you often see in your regular browsing operation. And every time you solve a CAPTCHA, the solution will be sent to the criminal so that they can create a fake account. If this is too much effort for the criminal, there are actually services that are specialized in creating fake accounts. And so these know how to create fake accounts in a way that makes it easier to defeat the countermeasures in place by the online service. So for example, they know how to create Facebook accounts that do not get deleted easily, or they know how to create Twitter accounts that do not get deleted easily, and so on, and how to set them up so that they look somewhat believable. So they set profile picture, they set bio information and whatnot. And then they offer these services to criminals for a fee. Other types of malicious operations include content generation. So we talked about search engine optimization. So criminals need to create a website that looks like a football website, but is not, to deliver malware, where someone needs to write the content for that website. And so there are services that provide that. And then finally, we have so-called money mules, which often can be seen as the weak link in a criminal operation. So suppose, and we describe this in detail in the knowledge area, that there is a credit card fraud operation. So the criminal will steal credit card numbers through malware. What do they then do with these cards? So they need to get money out of them somewhat. So an option is to recruit mules who are actors who are actually provided with counterfeit credit cards, and then they have to go make purchases and so on, and transfer some money back to the criminals. Or there are so-called reshipping mules, which are basically intermediaries that will receive packages that were bought with stolen credit cards, expensive goods like iPads or computers and whatnot, and their task, after under the payment of a fee, will be to actually send these packages to the criminal, adding some sort of level of indirection that will make it more difficult for law enforcement to track them down. And all these operations are described in detail in our document. And then, of course, another important element are payment methods. So criminals want to make money, and so eventually there need to be payments between victims and criminals for the operation to be sustainable. And to do that, the criminals have many different options. So they can use traditional payment methods like credit cards and traditional bank transfers. These have advantages because users are used to them, and so they're much more likely to be familiar with them and to actually have a credit card and to be willing to perform these payments and so on. They also have disadvantages because typically credit card processors and banks are very careful about fraud, And so eventually, if there are too many chargebacks against a certain merchant because this merchant is fraudulent, this merchant might be disconnected from the payment network. And so they might not be able to accept credit card payments anymore. And in the literature, there are some examples of actually criminals trying to avoid this by setting up customer service to their victims. And so if the victim believes that they've been defrauded and they complain to the criminal, they might even get their money back. And this is done so that the criminal will not be considered fraudulent by the credit card processor and will actually be able to continue operating. And then we have some more untraceable means like Western Union and other money transfer services where the victim has to go in person and transfer some money to the criminal. And then on the other end of the transaction, there is usually a money mule who actually goes and withdraws money on behalf of a main criminal. And this is done because this is actually a weak point in the criminal operation, because it's very easy for law enforcement to actually show up at the Western Union and arrest the criminal. And then, of course, the new frontier are cryptocurrencies. So these are more untraceable and make it actually much more difficult for law enforcement to figure out who the criminals are and where the money is going. And this has become the golden standard for certain types of crimes, such as ransomware. If your data is encrypted and you have no choice to get it back than buying cryptocurrencies and sending them to the criminal, chances are you will do it. But research has showed that for other types of crimes, actually cryptocurrencies still constitute a high entry barrier for victims. So people are not willing to purchase cryptocurrencies to buy certain types of services that might also be available through credit cards, for example. So there is some sort of trade-offs that criminals have to balance there. And we describe this in detail in our knowledge area. And finally, in our knowledge area, we survey a number of models that have been proposed in the literature and that have been proposed by different areas in academia, starting from computer science, moving to political science and criminology and so on. And all these techniques aim to actually model malicious operations in a way that makes them more understandable and in a way that helps identifying weak points that can be targeted for mitigation or law enforcement takedowns and so on. And in particular, we look at attack trees, which sort of identify the dependencies of the different parts of an attack or an operation. We look at kill chains that look at the different steps that an attack needs to go through to succeed. For example, infecting a victim with malware, performing some command and control, eventually monetizing, and so on and so forth. And we look at techniques and frameworks that come from environmental criminology that can help us better understand cybercrime and malicious online operations in general. And this is an interesting area because environmental criminology is heavily grounded in the physical space. So environmental criminology tries to study how the physical environment influences crime and so on. But the internet has some parallels with physical crime, but it's not straightforward to actually draw those parallels. So this is an open area of research that actually several people are pursuing and that we wanted to include in the knowledge area. And finally, we look at techniques proposed to actually attribute cyber attacks. So if we observe a cyber attack, can we actually figure out who was behind it? And this is not easy to do because, of course, deception online can be performed in a much easier way than in the physical world. But there are some frameworks that actually help us think about these type of issues. So to conclude, the spectrum of adversarial behaviors is very wide, and this knowledge area actually aims at providing an overview of the malicious operations that are happening on the internet today, provide some direction of where malicious operations might be going, as well as provide some help in better understanding and modeling these operations, which is a key element in actually developing any kind of mitigation.